There's nothing like a football stadium filled with avid fans. I mean, the energy, the roar, the cheering. I mean, if you're the home team, the fan base will, they have such an amazing ability to help energize you to victory. And if you're the away team, right, the visiting team, the home team's crowd is in the game, right? It is a game changer for the away team. There's something about avid fans that fill a stadium and the energy just surges through the entire game. The first time I ever went to a Penn State home football game, I tell you, I had never experienced something like that. A stadium that seats some 106,000 plus people, the second biggest stadium in the entire United States. I mean, bigger than all NFL teams. It's only second to Michigan's stadium, and it's only a few hundred seats smaller than Michigan Stadium. And I walked in, and the entire crowd with their white shirts on, there was just something electric to that experience. I remember where I sat, I remember the people around me, I remember the kickoff, and I remember the winning touchdown. There was something about that. We all know when the stands are filled and your team is winning, that is something. But we also know something about avid fans, the people that fill up the stadium. People in the stadium are experts, aren't they? Oh yeah, maybe you're the expert, or maybe you've gone to a game sitting next to the expert. The stands are filled with experts. I mean, they're smarter than every coach on the field. They're smarter than the conditioning coach. They're smarter than the running backs coach. They're even smarter than the head coach. Yeah, people in the stands are experts. They're smarter than the quarterback. I mean, they can play that position better than the quarterbacks on the field. They could throw more accurate. They could throw further. They could scramble faster. They could read the defense better than those quarterbacks. And people in the stands, they're expert running backs. I mean, they can move and shift and spin better than any running back on the field. The people in the stands are experts. I mean, they can play defensive line and block every hole, make every tackle, and never get a flag. People in the stands are experts. I mean, they're better referees than the refs on the field. They know the rule book better. They can see every foul on the other team better than the refs on the field. The people in the stands are experts. I mean, they know the game better than anyone. Isn't that true? The thing is, people in the stands, they're not on the field, are they? Nope, the people in the stands, they haven't had to commit to anything other than driving to the stadium. The people in the stands haven't had to work hard and endless practices and conditioning that left them to the point of exhaustion. They haven't had to memorize a playbook and understand the opponent's playbook. The people in the stands, they've risked nothing. I mean, other than maybe eating one or two extra hot dogs that leaves some heartburn in them. The people in the stands, they haven't had to put it all on the line. The people on the stands, they could say anything they want. They can question every call. They could say what call they would make. They could say what play they would run. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter what call they would run. There's no risk for them. There's no risk of winning, and there's no risk of losing. People in the stands, I mean, it's easy to question the referees calling. It's easy for them to question the flag that was thrown and the flag that wasn't thrown. But at the end of the day, they can get it wrong, and no one's going to question them. No one's going to argue with them. They'll make a statement. Maybe their friend sitting to their left, their friend sitting to the right might question them. But again, they're not risking anything. And that's why there's always something about being on the field. Because you see, when you step onto the field, it's a whole different experience when you step on the field. If you've played sports at any point in your life, you know. When you step on the field, all that hard work, all that dedication, all that commitment, now it has to be played out on the field. Now. Everything your coaches have coached you, now. Everything mentally you have prepared for, now. You might lose big, but you also might win big. And if you've ever been on a field and you won that game or that division or that championship, it's one thing to be a fan of a team and your team wins. I mean, that's a good feeling. But if you've ever been a player on the field and won the game, there's nothing like that feeling of triumph. There's nothing like being on the field. You see, we're in this series talking about a guy named Gideon. We find this story in a book, it's called Judges. And what's interesting about the book called Judges, it's all about this group of people that were called judges. Not like the judges we think of today, not men or women in a black robe, not Judge Judy, but these judges were, they were God's deliverers. They were mighty chieftain warriors that God would raise up when Israel finally repented, finally turned from their ways and faced God. God would send in these judges to move out the oppressors, these evil, vile, foreign national tribes, nations that would come in and oppress Israel. And so these judges were what God used to bring peace back into Israel. Out of all these judges, Gideon is such an interesting story because there's so many moments in Gideon's story that's, I think is so similar to your story and my story. You see, what we learned quickly about Gideon, and this was part one of the series, that Gideon was a coward. He wasn't this courageous leader, this courageous military warrior. No, when we first meet Gideon, he's hiding, threshing wheat by himself. But God called him mighty hero. And you see, that's where we landed in part one. That when God is with you, the name he calls you, that's the game changer. And here's the amazing fact is that when God calls you a name, you don't even have to see it in you because God is with you. And Gideon, for sure, didn't see it within him, not at all. He didn't see that he was a mighty warrior. No. Gideon, he saw himself as a coward, but God was with him. And so at the very end of last week, we ended with this statement from God to Gideon, and God had said to Gideon, I will be with you. But God didn't stop there. God said, I'm going to be with you, and not only, Gideon, are you going to rescue Israel, and God just elevates the triumphant victory that Gideon was going to experience. You see, God said, and you, Gideon, will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. Hey, Gideon, you're gonna enter into a battle, and just so you know, Gideon, it'd be like you versus one man, but so you know, it's going to be against all the Midianites. But Gideon, remember, I'm with you, and when I'm with you, that's a game changer. When I'm with you, you will be triumphant, and that triumph will be easy. Well, Gideon comes back at God because Gideon was still in this space, not seeing himself as a mighty hero, not even wondering if he wanted to be part of this mighty plan. And so Gideon said, hey, if you truly are going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it's really the Lord speaking to me. You see, Gideon really wanted to know, is this God? Because if it is God, then okay, maybe, just maybe, you should consider saying yes. So he said, hey, show me a sign. He went on and said, don't go away until I come back and bring my offering to you. See, Gideon wanted to make sure that if this is God, he wanted to bring back to God this gift, a gift fit for a mighty king, a gift fit for the all-powerful God. And Gideon said, hey, just don't go away. I want to prepare something for you. I'll be back. And God said, I will stay here until you return. So Gideon goes back home and he takes a young goat, slaughters the young goat, and that was a kingly gift, right? A young goat that's never been able to breed and have more goats, right? It was a young goat, a precious goat, and he slaughtered the young goat, and he got some broth and brought that, and then we're told that he baked enough bread that he used some 34 to 40 some pounds of flour. Again, this wasn't one small basket of dinner. I mean, this was a feast. So he brings this feast to who he thinks is God, but he wants to make sure this is God. And when he brings this feast, remember what was occurring in the land. We looked at this in part 1. You see, over 7 years, the Israelites had been attacked, and starvation had hit the land. But Gideon chooses to bring a feast in the midst of starvation. You see, what an amazing picture of generosity. You see, we talk about generosity all the time. And we say over and over again that when we give, when we tithe, when we give our offering, it's not just about the act of giving. It's about the worship that happens when we give. You see, generosity is all about worship. And that's something Gideon understood. And our act of worship to God has nothing to do with our circumstances. For Gideon, they were in the midst of an overwhelming season of starvation for years and years and years, and he brought the best to God. And I just tell you, I've been overwhelmed in this unprecedented moment, the generosity that has just erupted from within our churches. You giving generously, you giving sacrificially, you giving your best in an act of worship to God. And you see, there's something that's faith expanding when we give in an act of worship. And Gideon, not even sure if this was God, brings this offering, this gift, and he places it down. And we're told that the angel of God told Gideon to take the meat and the bread and place it on this rock. Then the angel of God told Gideon to take the broth and pour it all over the meat and the bread, just drenching it. And once Gideon had done that, the angel of God took his staff, touched the rock, and fire consumed the gift. And in that moment, Gideon knew. And Gideon says, "Oh, sovereign Lord." He knew right away. Any question mark he had about who this person was he was talking to, any doubts that he had about who this person he was interacting with, any thought in his mind that left some uncertainty, Gideon knew it was God. And he said, "Lord, I'm doomed, for I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face." And God said, "Gideon, it's all right. Do not be afraid. You will not die." And then that night, I mean, it wasn't weeks or months or even days. That night, God said to Gideon, hey, Gideon, I need you to do something. He said, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old. And that's a very important statement, and we're going to learn why in just a moment. But God was very specific, and right in this moment, Gideon knew that God was up to something and that Gideon was going to have to step out of the stands and onto the field. God goes on and says, pull down and here it was, your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole. Remember, when God was sending the Israelites, his chosen people, into the promised land, he told Joshua, hey, Joshua, drive out all the Canaanites from the promised land. Why? Because the Canaanites were worshiping the gods of Baal and Asherah, these two deities, these pagan constructs that were filled with not only just moral debauchery, but they were worshipped with child sacrifice. And God's like, Joshua, you and the Israelites have to drive them all out. If not, my chosen people, the Israelites, will start worshiping Baal and start worshiping Asherah. You got to drive them out. And Joshua didn't do it. He didn't do it. And the Israelites, I mean, this is the story of Judges. It was the cycle we looked at. Would turn from God and start worshiping Baal and worshiping Asherah. You see, when God said to Gideon, hey, your father has a bull, 7 years old. You see, part of the common worship practice of those worshiping Baal and Asherah is they would sacrifice bulls, and that bull was reserved for a sacrifice for Baal, for Asherah. And not only was that bull reserved for that, I mean, we learned that it was Gideon's dad. In their town, Gideon's dad was like the steward over the altar to Baal and the Asherah pole. It was Gideon's dad that, well, he made sure that those two spaces for pagan worship that he took care of. It was in that space that we realized that Gideon's entire family was at the center of Baal worship and Asherah worship. This pagan, I mean, just complete, like we can't even grasp the darkness around the worship of Baal and Asherah. And God looks at Gideon and says, you're to tear it down. Your dad's altar to Baal, your dad's Asherah pole, and your dad's bull reserved to be a sacrifice for Baal and Asherah. Gideon, that's what I'm calling you to do. And then God says, then build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary. And this hilltop sanctuary, again, when the Midianites would come in, people in the different villages would rush out to caves to hide from these foreign armies coming in that were just killing them and destroying their crops. And so God said, right here in their hilltop sanctuary where they go to be safe, I want you to build an altar right there and sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fuel the wood from the Asherah pole you cut down. So Gideon took 10 of his servants, and listen to this, did as the Lord had commanded him. I mean, Gideon knew. I mean, he knew. I mean, this, not only in his entire community, I mean, this was an action against his dad, an action against his family, and he did what God had commanded him. But the next thought, again, is just revealing to exactly where Gideon was in that moment. You see, we're told, but Gideon did it at night. Why? Because he was afraid. He was afraid. I mean, yeah, God was with him, and God had called him a mighty hero, but Gideon was still a coward. And so he's like, okay, I got to do what God has told me to do because I'm facing sovereign Lord, but I'm going to try to do it because I don't want to face my dad. I want to face my family, and I don't want to face the other people in my town. So he grabbed members of his father's household and he took the altars down. You see, I think about that moment. He was afraid, but yet he obeyed. He was afraid, yet he obeyed. I mean, he was afraid of his dad, but he obeyed. He was afraid of the townspeople, but yet he obeyed. He didn't see himself as a mighty hero, yet he obeyed. He wasn't sure if he could actually lead Israel out of oppression into freedom, but yet he obeyed. He wasn't sure if he was good enough, yet he obeyed. He didn't know if he had it in him, but yet he obeyed. He didn't know if he had the self-confidence, yet he obeyed. There's a whole list of things that he didn't know about himself, but yet he obeyed. He obeyed. What's God asking from you right now that you're not sure about, that you don't see within you, that your mind is filled with thoughts of uncertainty? You see, at the end of the day, God is just calling us to obey. The greatest journey of faith is obedience. It's following God even when we're not sure. It's following God when we don't have all the answers. It's following God when uncertainty is just swirling within us. It's following God when we don't want to. It's following God when we don't think we can. It's following God when fear is surrounding us. It's following God even in the moments where we're not sure where God is leading us. It's all about obedience. And that's what Gideon does. He grabs servants. He tears down the altars. Takes a bowl. Everything God had commanded him to do. And then the next morning, the townspeople, the village people, the people that Gideon had grown up with. I mean, these are families that he knew really well. They all woke up and someone finds out that the pole to Asherah and the altar to Baal had been torn down, and the crowds were furious. So they started asking around, like, who did this? Who did this? And remember, Gideon had taken 10 of the servants from his father's family, right? His family. And you know, whenever you have more than one person knowing what happened, right, someone's going to talk. And out of those 10 servants, someone talked. And the townspeople found out. It was Gideon. It was Gideon. So the townspeople goes to Gideon's dad Joash, and they say, bring out your son, for he must die for destroying the altar of Baal and for cutting down the Asherah pole. But Joash shouted to the mob that confronted him. And Joash, the one that was the steward, the overseer of the altar to Baal and the Asherah pole, it was Joash that said, why are you defending Baal? Will you argue Baal's case? If Baal is truly his God, let Baal defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar. You see, something happened in that moment where you see Joash take a spiritual step away from Baal, or away from Asherah, back to God. Now, we don't know the rest of the story, but in that moment, instead of reprimanding his son for using his bowl, tearing down his Asherah pole, tearing down his altar to Baal, Joash said, well, if Baal's real, then Baal can take care of it himself. You see, Gideon in that moment had such a spiritual impact on his dad's life. In that moment, Gideon, who risked it all, his dad took a step back to God. You see, I think this is what God's calling for you. Calling for you to stop being a spectator. Stop being a spectator. Step out of the stands and seize your place right on the field. You don't have to have the answers. You don't have to see it in you. Fear can still be swirling. You can have all the unknowns. but obey. Because God wants to do something in you and through you, but you got to be on the field. You got to seize your place. God has a plan for you. God has a purpose for you. God has a destiny for you, but you got to stop spectating. You got to step out of the stands, and you have to seize your place on the field. You see, this is one of the greatest seasons for the church to be the church. I know there's been so much conversations about church buildings being empty and churches closing down, and I just tell you, it's just the opposite for me. I see the church being deployed like no other time in this generation. That we get to be a part of the church, a movement of God, the hope of the world, to tell all people about Jesus. We have such an incredible opportunity right now, in this unprecedented moment, to see God's unprecedented movement to tell all people about Jesus. But God's looking at you. Don't think about the person sitting next to you or that other person that you know or your life group leader or that person that serves on the team. No. This is for you. God's looking at you and say, stop spectating, step out of the stands, and seize your place on the field. So what are you going to do? No matter your fear, no matter your uncertainty, no matter your unknown, what are you going to do to join God with what God is doing? Because he's doing something unprecedented right now. Seize your place on the field because God's on the move and he wants to use you to be part of his movement. You see, the third step of our life path is called legacy. It's all about leaving a legacy that's beyond you. And that's when you partner to be part of God's story. And part of legacy and on our life path is all about being an advancing leader, about being part of God's movement, the church, which is the hope of the world. And this is what I ask from all of you. Pray about being an advancing leader. You might be going, oh, Chris, what's that? I need more information. Give me the checklist. Give me, I need the book about what advancing leader is. No. We'll get to that in a moment. What I'm asking you to do is pray. You pray about being an advancing leader, to take that step on the life path, seize your place on the field, and join God because God is on the move and he's doing something unprecedented. Stop spectating, take a step out of the stands and seize your place. Stop spectating, step out of the stands and seize your place. Stop spectating, step out of the stands and seize your place. And watch what God will do in you and through you. Let's pray. Lord, I just pray. I ask that we'll be faithful in obedience, just like Gideon was. He was afraid, but yet he obeyed. He was afraid, but yet he obeyed. And so, Lord, I just pray in this unprecedented season that we will be a church filled with people that refuse to spectate, that refuse to stay seated in the stands, and who will step out on the field to seize their place, to be part of your movement, to tell all people about Jesus. Lord, I pray that we're that church right now in this season. In your name I pray. Amen.